Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martyn Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Watea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa, the true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest, plus their 9% enablers, versus the 90% rest of us. And once you see politics through that lens, the left can never lose an election ever again. Welcome to the Bradbury Group, Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martyn Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are militant cyclist and listener columnist Simon Wilson, business desk journalist Maria Slade, and New Zealand Herald columnist, academic and political commentator Matthew Houghton. Tonight's one-on-one in 10 is the leader of the Opportunities Party, Qiulae Wong, who has gone from pretender to contender after the Roy Morgan poll put top at 6%. Our extra one-on-one tonight is Alliance Party leader Victor Billot on his historic union affiliation win. How does the left fight an economic election, and how does the left fight the global rise of the far right? Shout out to Kiwi Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. You make this show one of the most watched live podcasts in New Zealand, and your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Watea, Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcast and Sky TV whānau. Remember to like and subscribe, because that's all that's holding the Fourth Estate together right now. And our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, it's 101 days of Trump's 3-week illegal war with Iran that he has already won 17 times by blocking the blockade with his own blockade. And apparently he's about to make a peace deal for the 10,000th time to return the situation to the exact same one that existed before he and Netanyahu launched the worst thought-out adventure since Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Terrible movie. Trump gets very grumpy these days when he is asked, are we there yet, as to when the war he started might end, and has already threatened to turn the car around and go straight home if we keep bugging him. I don't want to concern anyone here, but it seems like Donald Trump doesn't actually know what the hell he's doing, which, when you think about it, is quite alarming. This Muppet launched a war that no one in the American administration would ever embark upon, because it's a lose, lose, lose quagmire. And then he gets annoyed when we ask, how much longer do we all have to suffer for this idiocy? It's like being lectured on manners by the arsonist who has burnt down your house. Remember, our Prime Minister secretly wanted to support America in Israel's illegal war on Iran. Don't forget that every time you fill up your car. Talking of red flags, National Party backbench MP Joseph Mooney told the press last week that the reason why he tweeted 629 times last month was because, and I quote, a desire to train future AI on rational fact-based arguments. How much of a Tinder red flag is that? If you were in the middle of your first date and they say, I have a desire to train future AI on rational fact-based arguments, you would be on your phone texting, call me now, emergency, ring, 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 ring. I have to take this. Hello, my whole family have been hit by an asteroid and they have COVID. Hey, I'm going to have to cut this short. Great meeting you, and good luck on that whole training future AI on rational fact-based argument thing. And ghost. What level of Trumpian delusion do you need to be to believe that your addiction to attention on Twitter is actually you teaching AI how to be rational? Only a backbench MP from the South Island could be that falsely confident. He's the intellectual equivalence of a captive breeding program between a cow and a glass of homogenized milk. And finally, this week, the ACT Party are campaigning against the price of school uniforms. But seeing what they did to the school lunches, the question is, do we really want to have ACT meddle with school uniforms? Let's go there. Little Billy has taken the PM's advice and brought his own Marmite sandwiches, while Little Miss Four Eyes comes with her own begging bowl as an additional attachment for only $39.99. And Little Spencer is ready for a powerful day of education at his charter school with his mismatched socks, dirty waistcoat and rheumatic fever. Tiny Pierre is truant, not truant, in this Brooke Van Velden jacket uniform ensemble. Remember, comrades, friends don't let friends vote ACT. The political panel all stars up shortly, Whānau, but first, this week's 1-on-1 in 10 with leader of the Opportunities Party, Qiulae Wong, who has gone from pretender to contender after the Roy Morgan poll put top at 6%. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora, thanks for having me.
Qiulae, top gaining 6% in the Roy Morgan poll is an extraordinary achievement, and I say that as someone who has helped start 3 political parties. Why is top appealing to voters this year, and who is your electorate?
Yeah, firstly, just want to acknowledge it's a momentous time for us. We've never polled this high in the history of the party, so we're really taking a moment to acknowledge where we are on that huge mountain. I think the reason we are polling here is many, many factors. We've learnt a lot. The campaign's been before. We're putting in the work in terms of the ground game and actually getting out into communities. We know that we have to earn the trust of New Zealanders, and they need to believe that we can represent them well in Parliament. But also, totally timing is good for us. People are really frustrated and they don't believe that the major parties in particular have got the solutions for the big challenges that we are faced with today. And so they are looking for a party with bold ideas that can actually take us to a future that our young kids are going to want to stay for, that are going to want to come back and help us build together. And so we're really stoked that the momentum that we're feeling on the ground is reflected in the polls.
What are the core values of the Opportunity Party?
So our values are kind of different, I suppose, from a typical political ideology. I think for us, it's about that long-term view. So it's really always thinking about how do we not only make our society better today, but what is going to be best for the next generation. That's how we approach decision making. And then I think the other core part of our values is around this harmony between the economy and the environment. We don't think those things need to be in conflict. And I suppose that's where the challenge comes with, we've got people on the left wing calling us right wing, people on the right calling us left, because we care about business and we care about the environment. And we think that that is actually the new frame for the next era of our society.
You have the great Ian Lees Galloway and the greater Jackie Blue in the background of the party. Jackie was furious with the pay parity decision. Is that one idea or piece of legislation that top would repeal if in power?
Yeah, we certainly, obviously it's not just up to us, and there is a big budget consideration with that, but it is a priority for us and we would certainly push for that to be repealed. I think that is a classic acknowledgement of how if we actually pay people better, our economy will work better. It's not just, obviously we want to, it's about fairness and it's about treating people well. It's also about recognizing that that is what builds a good economy.
If you cross the threshold this election, what are the guiding principles of how you would negotiate? Would you seek out the largest political party first?
Yeah, I think it's fair to negotiate with the largest political party first. I think that's a sort of unwritten rule of MMP that we would continue to follow. In saying that, if we felt like those negotiations were leading down a path where we felt like we had to compromise too much on our values, we wouldn't be accepting deals just for a seat at the table. Then we could look at the other party and see what they've got to offer. We'll be really clear what our top priorities are going into that negotiation. And obviously, the other parties will have their policies as well. They'll announce, hopefully, sometime this year. And we'll be looking to see how much alignment there is between what they're putting out and what we've got.
Would you seek government coalition or vote from the crossbenchers? And what is the process for deciding that?
We are not ruling anything out. So I know previously we've said openly we'd only go on the crossbenchers.
Yep.
I think it's important for us to keep those options open. There might be a really good coalition agreement, good partnership that we think is really valuable, and we can get some key policies across the line with that. So that's certainly an option. Again, I feel like if we don't feel like we could work with either party constructively on what we want to achieve, we would either sit on crossbenchers, or I don't know. There's multiple ways that outcome could go when it comes to negotiating.
What are TOP's bottom lines?
Our top priorities are really clear on the website. So oceans, energy, productivity, tax, and citizens' assemblies. Obviously, we're not going to get all of those, but those are the things we're going into that negotiating conversation with. I think in terms of red lines that we don't want to agree to, that will be any further rolling back of environmental issues.
Right.
Or something like a treaty principles bill we certainly wouldn't agree to.
Who could TOP work with? A National Act New Zealand First government or a Labour Green Te Pāti Māori government?
We honestly could work with either group. I think our preference would be to have fewer parties in that coalition, ideally 2, but maybe 3. It's going to be interesting to see how the numbers roll coming closer to the election. With the major parties getting less, you've got, potentially a 4-party coalition. We genuinely would sit around the table to try and negotiate in good faith with any of those parties.
Finally, Qiulae, you are out all the time talking with voters this election. What are they telling you about what they're needing?
Honestly, the pendulum politics thing comes up over and over again. Whether I'm talking to people that work in education, in health, whether they're in business, in local government, it's that constant changing tact every 3 years or every 6 years that I think is stalling our economy and creating more division in our politics. And that's what we're hearing really loud and clear. People want some stability and consistency going forward, but they also recognise we need some big ideas that are going to work for the majority of New Zealanders. And we think that that's really what we're bringing to this election. You've
got some big backers who have donated money to you. They've also donated money to other right-wing political organisations. Are you coming to this clean-skinned? Are you coming to this election not owing anyone anything?
Absolutely. We are very clear with our donors and with the public that donations do not buy influence.
Yes.
We have had, interestingly, both Philip Mills and Brian Cutmell, who are on both ends of the political spectrum. And I think the commonality, the common thing that they're donating to us for is fresh ideas and a fresh voice. And they recognise they don't agree with everything that we stand for. There's 1 or 2 things that they really love, but mainly it's the fresh voice.
Thank you, comrade, for your insight and oversight. We'll speak with you again next month.
Thank you.
Cheers. The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau. But now this week's extra 1-on-1 in 10 with Alliance Party leader Victor Billot on his historic union affiliation win. How does the left fight an economic election, and how does the left fight the global rise of the far right? Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
No, thank you.
Victor, congratulations on your historic union affiliation with the staunchest union in New Zealand, the Maritime Union of New Zealand. They decided to back the Alliance Party this election, which is surely a clear signal that working people are sick to death of the Labour Party's incrementalism when it comes to supporting working people, doesn't it?
Well, I just think the Maritime Union, in their own words, have said, they're continuing their affiliation to the Labour Party. We have no problem with that whatsoever, but we're very grateful that they've come on board and shown that support to us. As you say, they're the oldest and probably one of the most high-profile unions in New Zealand. And I think that the fact they've affiliated to the Alliance Party pretty much shows we're back to represent the working class in this country.
If New Zealand is to adapt to the climate change realities we have now, a fully funded, publicly owned rail system linked to a new inshore coastal shipping network is an essential step forward. Why is keeping the ports in our infrastructure and public ownership so important?
Well, I think it's about strategic control. And what we're seeing overseas is when you lose control of those assets, especially ports, basically it's just another pipeline of cash. It's going out of the country, and it can really destabilise your entire transport infrastructure network. That's a really big thing for the Alliance. Obviously, pro-rail, we want to see coastal shipping back up in this country.
Preach. We seem to be a nation of foreign landlords who just milk monopoly rentals from this country. I'm looking at the banking oligopoly and the billions that leave New Zealand that should stay here and fund stuff here, but it all goes overseas because we have these foreign landlords. Will we see from the Alliance Party an economic policy that puts economic sovereignty at the top?
Yeah, and more than economic sovereignty. I mean, we're hearing a lot about fresh ideas in the election. So we've got a few of our own. And I think really we're the only socialist party running in this election. And we don't beat around the bush for that. And part of that is economic sovereignty. But it's not just economic sovereignty. It's about getting the wealth and the power of the working class majority in this country back up there.
Yes.
We've been taking a hammering for the last 30 or 40 years.
Oh, have we what?
And I think, you know, the establishment parties, especially the opposition, are not they're not taking the fight to the right wing, and that's what we intend to do.
Where do we find and fund this extra investment into our infrastructure?
Well, it has to come. We're not going to support it coming in from basically public-private partnerships, which are just another way of transferring control of our economy to multinationals.
Right.
So we're going to have a major redo of our tax system. And we're also calling for not just keeping control of public assets, we want to get them back. And the key ones there would be things like power.
Yes.
And massive problems with, as you've mentioned, with oligopolies, with the banking system. We want to get Kiwi Bank in a much more central position there. And even looking, as they've done in New York City, maybe a publicly owned cooperative style supermarket kind of system too. Yes. Just to provide a bit of an option there for people who are struggling at the moment, which is about 50% to 60% of the population, I'd say.
The working classes globally are being manipulated by the far right into racist attacks on migrant workers. Domestic workers look at migrant workers and fear their wages and conditions are being undermined. So surely the solution is to ensure universal union membership of all migrant workers so domestic workers know their migrant worker brothers and sisters aren't a threat. Will the Alliance Party push for universal union membership?
Definitely. I mean, obviously, being affiliated to the Maritime Union means says a bit about where we're coming from. But I'd just like to say there, you're quite right. And one very old idea that we seem to be missing out on these days in political debate is the old idea about international solidarity. I mean, 100 years ago, that was a very common idea. Workers of the world unite. So, I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea. And I think that we're back into that. We're against prejudice. We're against bigotry. We say people need to work together.
Amen. Left-wing politics is dominated now by middle-class identity politics and the professional managerial class rather than working-class economic solidarity. How will the Alliance change that, and what will you focus on in election 26?
Well, I think that's our key focus, is to get back that sense of solidarity, providing a working-class voice. We're not trying to appeal to everyone. We're trying to appeal to people who are really concerned about how our society's tanking, how the majority of people are now struggling with the basics, how we have to subsidise workers to actually survive on a day-to-day basis. Yep. And so we're working on things like the union stuff you've talked about, housing, and one of our other policies is the KiwiWorks, which I describe as a 21st century Ministry of Works.
Oh, God, we
can
need
start
that.
to build our own infrastructure and housing again,
Right.
which was able to be done in the 1930s. So
Yes.
I'm not quite sure why we can't do it now.
Who would the Alliance rule out working with this election?
Look, I mean, if we were in a position to make choices like that, I'd say obviously we would be backing, for the possibility, if there was a Labour, the Greens, their parties on our side of the.
But who would you rule out? Who would you rule out, Victor?
Oh, who would I rule out? Obviously, we can't support National Act, New Zealand First, parties like that.
There you go.
And I don't know about the Opportunities Party. I mean, I guess that all depends on what side of the fence they decide to sit on.
Indeed. Finally, Victor, 3 bottom lines the Alliance would take into any Labour-led government. What are they? Give me the 3.
I would say public health investment. I would say housing and trying to push our Ministry of Works idea.
Yep.
And I would also say moving towards a much stronger policies to get unions back in the mix as a way of delivering for people in New Zealand.
Yes, preach. Thank you so much for your insight and your oversight this evening. All power to your arm, comrade.
Thank you.
Be well. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the union rep for Slytherin House. He makes Machiavelli look like a virgin, and he's the only New Zealand right-winger not on the Taxpayers Union payroll. Joining us live in studio inside the New Zealand time zone for the first time this year, which must mean a National Party leadership coup is due, New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hurton. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Sorry, I can't comment.
You can't comment? No comment on why you're in Auckland? Because normally you're not in New Zealand. Normally you're in far away in some other time zone.
Well, there is one word that I would use to describe the situation, but I can't.
Sure. But you would note, would you not, that there is a perverse connection of you being in New Zealand and National Party leadership coups. There is clear stats that prove that, right?
I reject the premise of the question.
You reject the premise of the question? That's fantastic. Our second panellist is actually too good for this show. One of the best respected business journalists in the game, 100% House of Gryffindor. She's a Fourth Estate guardian playing watchdog on the economy. The universally beloved business desk journalist, Maria Slade. Kia ora. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
Frustrated. I have had the joy of trying to decipher some of the budget allocations in the last week or so. Boy, do I have some stories to tell you. But one story I will tell you is the communications person for a government agency today, who shall remain nameless.
I read your column.
Who told me, this is another matter actually, keep your eye on Business Desk this week, who told me that the budget numbers are not necessarily reflective of actual funding.
What?
I'm sure the finance minister would be quite interested to hear that one.
And you're not going to name names?
Not just yet.
I'm loving your work at the moment. And last but certainly not least, he's the first son of Auckland, a militant cyclist and ceaseless campaigner for a better world. On the side of the angels, urban architecture, and probably veganism. He's that odd pottery piece you bought from Trade Aid but wasn't quite sure what it was. Listen to columnist Simon Wilson. Kia ora, comrade.
It's all compliments, isn't it?
It is.
Everything you said. Everything you said. Amazing.
One word to describe the week,
well,
please.
Thomas Piketty is back. So my one word is sufficiency. Thomas Piketty, who people
has he learnt any arithmetic yet?
Oh, Thomas Piketty, who has released a report called the Global Justice Report. It's
good.
It's about equality and prosperity, the search for it within planetary boundaries. And sufficiency is his word. His argument is it's got to be possible for us to do something that is not growth and is not degrowth, but if we can manage to develop political economy, sufficiency, if we can learn to live with what we need. And so he says that's obviously going to need rapid decarbonisation. It's obviously going to need a compression between the enormous wealth and poverty in the world. And also going to mean things like shorter working hours, lower material footprint that we all have, a shift of funding into education and health, major changes to what we eat and how we use land. It's controversial. Is he going to get anywhere? Who would know? But we need to keep talking about those things, and that's the word he's putting in.
Preach. Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1, 33,000 homeless children while company liquidations climb to 11-year high. Is that the growth we were promised in the budget? Issue 2, why strangle Māori representation at the council level? Is democracy really under attack the way ACT and Taxpayers Union claims? And issue 3 tonight, Labour Party list versus New Zealand First Party list. Whose circus has most clowns? Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show where each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. My money is on John Tamahiri, and he isn't even on tonight's show. Let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. Damning research out highlighting the hidden homelessness in New Zealand of 33,000 kids, while liquidations hit an 11-year high as hundreds of hospo and construction businesses go under. Is this the growth we were promised in the budget? Matthew Hooton, you were maybe the very first commentator who said New Zealand is a poorer country now. And you've argued no one is prepared to admit that. When does that realisation of poverty become an election issue for this election?
Well, poverty's been an election issue every election. John Key, when he became leader of the National Party, gave his famous speech down in Burnside and then went up to Magee Close. It took Little Araha to Waitangi, and he was going to address the problem of the underclass. And, of course, Jacinda Ardern was going to reduce child poverty. She was elected on that, and she made herself Minister for Child Poverty Reduction. These things are just words. All those slogans have turned out to be hollow and have failed. 33,000, it's not 33,000 homeless, according to the research you're referring to. It's also housing
deprivation.
Deprived. To a significant degree.
People living in houses that they shouldn't be in. That's a rat.
But the chickens are coming home to roost, as New Zealand has failed for at least 20 years to improve its productivity substantially enough, and as it is continually borrowed to cover over the fact that it has become, relatively speaking, a poorer and poorer country.
Nobody wants to hear that in an
election.
election.
No one wants to hear it.
No one wants to hear that.
Well, here we are, and we've also got the COVID hangover, and now we've got the war, so we're seeing construction down, we've seen goods exports down, although the services sector is doing quite well, which I suppose is one encouraging thing in the recent statistics from the trade stats.
Follow-up question. Would you, as a libertarian nihilist, accept a higher debt level if it meant less poverty?
There's no such trade-off.
Well, what if we agree that debt is 40% GDP now rather than 30%? What if we do
the
that?
reason we have an inadequate health system, education system, and welfare system is not because our doctors and nurses or teachers or social workers aren't any good. It's because all the money which would go to improve those services goes on debt servicing. So the reason we have a perception that our health system isn't doing as well as it could, or we're not providing as much welfare as we might, is because we've had 20 years of party time with John Key and Jacinda Ardern.
We lowered the corporate tax rate from 33 cents down to 28, didn't we?
Well, yeah, but the corporate tax rate with the holding tax doesn't make that much difference. I mean, the scale of our problems, even the tax cuts that Christopher Luxon shouldn't have done, which was a stupid
$14 billion
thing.
that we had to borrow for.
But that's right. That whole $14 billion has been borrowed. No way of escaping that. But we are so much in the hole that $14 billion isn't even that much.
Maria, 33,000 children living in deprivation, food banks losing 50% of their funding, and sky-high liquidations. The economy is not as robust as I've been led to believe by Chris Luxon. There's a lot of losers here. Who are the winners economically right now?
Oh, that's a good question. One of the figures that I saw this week that gave me pause for thought was the building work in place statistics that came out Statistics New Zealand's regular reporting, lowest level since 2015. So the construction sector is not having a good time at the moment.
Yep.
I think the liquidation figures are a bit of a red herring, and we've discussed this before.
Yeah. You've said they're coming for blood.
Because it's a real lag, and it is the IRD trying to collect their debt. Basically, if you look at the number of liquidations that have been instigated by the IRD, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head this week, but it's half to 2/3 maybe.
Sure.
So that's just, and it takes the IRD a long time.
Sure.
To collect that debt. So those problems have been in the works for quite a while. So I'm not sure that liquidations
are they getting worse or are they getting better? I mean, is IRD still they've got to get the money?
Yeah, they've got to work it through. It just takes time. You go up to the High Court, a matter appears, it'll only be the first call, then the can will get kicked down the road for another month or two, and then the second call, the third call. So it takes a while to work its way through. I don't necessarily think
it's... about 25 years ago, the IRD was criticised for being too brutal with people. I think there was a book on it.
That's right, yeah.
Do you think just in the last 10 years or a bit less, 6 years, the IRD has gone a bit too the other way, too soft, and is allowing people to set up instalment arrangements too readily, and so
well, what happened was we had the COVID years, and they went really, really soft during that time because they tried their best not to put businesses under, but they ran out of road on that. In the end, the IRD has to collect its debt, and we're still seeing some of that hangover.
Yeah,
and some of those businesses deserve to fail because they're not solvent. So I'm not sure that that's necessarily the greatest indicator of the state of the economy. But however, it's not good. That businesses are failing. But in terms of who's doing well, it's a hard one. I mean, agriculture is doing very, very well. Commodity prices are very high. The Fonterra dairy farmers got their little sweetener from the Lactalis sale, purchase, I should say.
Destroying all of those brands.
And there is this great North Island, South Island divide going on. In Christchurch and Queenstown, you wouldn't know there was anything wrong. Those guys are doing fine. Basically buoyed by tourism in Queenstown's case and agriculture in Christchurch's or Canterbury's case. So it is a bit of a north-south thing at the moment. And so the main centres like Auckland and Wellington, of course, with all the government cuts, are doing much worse than other parts of the country. So, that's one sector that you wouldn't be complaining at the moment.
Follow-up question. Do you sense from any government spokesperson a vision of New Zealand beyond the slashing of the budgets? I mean, put aside the collateral social damage, and what is the actual hope? Because questionably balancing the books in 3 years doesn't feel like much of a victory for a lot of Kiwis.
They are between a rock and a hard place. As Matthew rightly says, you can't keep on increasing debt because you increase your servicing costs, and that's money that could be going elsewhere. And so Nicola Willis had a hard job. But I think if you, like I was saying, the frustration of looking at some of these budget appropriations, it looks good on the surface, but once you start trying to read them, it is robbing Peter to pay Paul all over the place.
Yeah, isn't it?
So you won't get much comfort. And a story that I'm pursuing this week is about an initiative that was helping low-income families. Watch this space on Business Desk. From what I can understand, it's been badly slashed, if not cut. And, that's not going to look great in terms of the government's assistance for low-income households. So, there isn't a lot of good news in terms of helping those at the bottom of the heap. But then again, they've got to balance the books as well.
Simon, a 2024 Child Poverty Action Group report noted that as many as 15,000 teenagers were now working 20 to 50 hours a week to help pay the family bills. Poverty advocates this week say that number has risen, and the budget points out children in hardship has gone from 11% to over 14%. Children skipping school to work shifts to help pay the family bills doesn't appear in any of the brochures for egalitarian New Zealand I've seen. What's gone wrong here?
Well, I'm just going to hope that both the panellists in the room with me are not going to throw their microphones at me when I say that we don't have to balance the books as the bottom line is the first thing we need to do, or as the only or most fundamental thing we need to do. What we need to do is have an economy where money is being spent on housing, because housing is fundamental to everything, where money is being spent on education and on health and on social security and all the ways in which we can build an economy where people are working and working for decent wages and are building those homes, are building the infrastructure we need, are working in the health system, are working in the school system, are working in the trade system, which means that we are building our way economically.
Well, that's a motherhood and apple pie, but what does it mean?
What it means is you've got
How are you going to make that happen?
What it means is you've got to forget about this idea that the only truth in economics is to balance the books.
No one thinks that.
You do. You do. I'm sorry, Matthew, you've argued it over and over and over. You argue we're going to be in a catastrophic failure within a decade or two if we don't get round to this.
That's true.
That is absolutely nonsense. We are heading into a catastrophic failure now because we are not spending the money we need.
That's
we
also
don't have
true.
high public debt. We have high private debt. The lower the public spending goes, the more the private sector has to
We do
pick
have
up
one
the
of the
slack.
lowest
And that
state debts.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
becomes a recipe
But we
for
have
impoverishing people
we're heading
all
towards
the more.
50% already. Our bond yield, what we have to
There's
pay.
no our. We're talking about how do we increase productivity? How do we increase? How do we develop a society where, as you said, Martyn, we don't have kids having to work in jobs and be taken out of
Well,
school?
borrowing
How do we do
borrowing
that?
$280 billion and getting it
Spending
spent
money,
by.
spending money in education and health, spending money on
No,
infrastructure.
you're becoming
Isn't it a waste?
angry.
That's
We've
not a
borrowed
waste.
in the last 2 decades under Bill English and Grant Roberts and Nicola Willis. We've borrowed $280 billion after Michael Cullen paid off the debt. You would think that if borrowing money to spend on things was any solution, this would be nirvana.
But they keep borrowing for tax cuts, don't they?
No,
they keep
have
borrowing
been
for tax
the
cuts.
total tax case.
Martyn's absolutely right.
The
borrowing has not been used to spend on infrastructure
the
the way it should
total
have been.
tax take in New Zealand is at a record high. Total spending and borrowing is all at a record high. These aren't made up. These are facts. And
But the
simply borrowing more to put into whatever.
We have a myth that you are promulgating all over again, that our fundamental economic problem is public spending. That is not the case. Our fundamental problem is public spending in the sense that it is not
serious problem.
enough to meet demand.
We might move towards a system where we increase taxes significantly.
Yes,
We might.
yes.
That would be one way of doing it. What we have
That's
is an
right.
incoherence.
Yeah, agreed.
We have an incoherence that we have a voting base that will not accept higher taxes
Yeah.
and will not accept spending cuts.
and
now
we
we have
have-
to have one of them or both of them. In fact, we need both of them.
And we have a social construct that says whenever anyone talks about higher taxes, they're talking about taxing me. A genuinely progressive tax system
We'll only go after the richest.
Exactly.
Preach.
Well, you can't do that.
Quick round
Well, of course
to
you can.
all of you. Quick
No, of course
round
you
to all of
can't.
you.
Of course you
Quick-
can.
No,
quick round.
no
Quick round to
country
all of
does
you.
that.
Quick round
Because
to all
most
of you.
countries are captured.
Quick round to all of us.
Quick round to all of you. I'm looking at these numbers of children in poverty. I'm looking at this damage that's going on. And what surprises me is no one seems to give a shit. Have we become a meaner society? Matthew Hooten.
No, I don't think we're meaner than we were in the 70s or before then, or the 60s or the 50s. I think what we are is a second world economy, and our homelessness figures and our poverty figures are no worse than other second world countries. But because I think there's more than a touch of white supremacy in New Zealand, we think we're a white country and we're sort of like Australia or the UK or Europe. But we're not. We're a failed state. A failed economy, a failing economy, which is worse, actually. We're not failed, we are
not Mogadishu
failing.
yet.
We are failing.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's okay, because in life it's okay to fail because
A
then you
little
can
bit,
improve. But
sure.
what this country is doing is constantly failing. And, of course, you've got 33,000 children that are homeless because that's what you have in second world economies.
Maria, are we meaner? Or do we just not give a shit anymore?
No, I don't think we're meaner. I think there is an innate sense of fair play amongst the New Zealand psyche. But I think the problems are just growing. The inequality is growing, and the problems are more complex that families are facing. It's not just a matter of poverty. It's a matter of drug abuse. It's a matter of alcoholism and oh God, the way social media affects children these days, and the mental health problems a lot of young people have. Those sorts of issues. They're just so complex that I think a lot of people feel quite overwhelmed. Like, how do we solve this sort of thing?
Simon, are we meaner? Because I follow quite a few New Zealand First activists, and they're terrible human beings. And I want to burn the planet. I want to burn the planet.
So we don't have to. I think Maria is right. I think New Zealanders, as a general rule, are not mean. I think we are generous and wholehearted, and are motivated by a good impulse. I do think that about our society. However, when you say no one seems to care, you are talking about the major political parties, and the fact of the matter is that neither of them perceives that there are votes to be gained from caring, so they don't care or don't care sufficiently. That is a terrible problem we have. You also said much earlier on in this podcast that left-wing politics are dominated by identity politics. That isn't true. It might be true to a degree of some people, but if you look at what the Greens and Te Pāti Māori do and say and act on and campaign on, it is over and over and over and over economic issues, Māori issues, and climate and other environmental issues. They care. They really do care. And they get sidelined by a constant refrain of you guys just care about identity politics. It is so untrue, and it's going to make this election interesting, because that argument has worked for New Zealand First and a lot of other people too, and so they'll keep being
I'm not sure caring achieves very much. I mean, we had. I mean, I don't think.
Are you just going to do? I'm going to do a value analysis of caring. Go for it.
Well, I think that we had in recent times two prime ministers who cared deeply.
You're lovely.
I think Jacinda Ardern, and before her Bill English, cared, deeply about having a more egalitarian society, whatever caring means, but. So?
What do you mean so? Jacinda Ardern's caring response after the mosque massacres in 2019 was profoundly significant.
Yeah, it was about the same as Bill English would have done.
That
isn't true.
Come on!
Yes, it is.
We don't. Ridiculous.
We don't
would have
know
said
if it's
John
true.
Key would have done the same.
Very
Bill
unlikely.
English doesn't hug.
I mean, Jacinda Ardern was failed completely. She promised
That
things.
isn't true.
She reset things.
She promised to do certain things, and those things didn't happen.
Well,
She promised to do other things which did happen.
Comrades, we need
She
to
has
move
a
on
mixed
to issue 2
record. She
tonight.
didn't fail completely. She has a
She
mixed
failed
record.
completely.
And that is
She's utterly failed on everything that matters.
Comrades, we need to move.
Except the mosque. I mean, no one could deny that. She was a wonderful leader
She
that
was
day.
really good over COVID. She was really good over
Well,
COVID.
in the first year of it.
Yeah,
At
that's
least
right,
you were
that's
in
right.
Auckland.
Comrades, we
Yeah.
need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is the government's sudden desire through local council minister Simon Watts to legislate away any unelected Māori representation that has voting rights on local councils, with ACT and the Taxpayers Union claiming it was a threat to democracy. Really? Maria, these Māori representatives had voting rights on getting things through to council. They didn't have final voting rights on what council decided. Isn't this race-baiting bullshit dressed up as a legitimate concern for democracy?
It is hard to figure out what problem it is they're solving. And I liked the point that Mahe Drysdale, the Tauranga Mayor, made when he said that they're shifting about a third of the council's business to these separate water authorities, the people on these boards will not have voting rights. So what's the difference? Why suddenly getting all concerned about Māori representatives having a vote? And yes, as you say, the sort of big picture things are still decided by the elected members.
Follow-up question. This also impacts youth representatives as well.
Yes.
Hastings granted youth councillors voting rights on some council committees when local democracy is dying and participation is waning. Why shut down Māori and youth engagement in a process they don't even have a final say in? Isn't this just more Māori bashing from ACT and Taxpayers Union?
Well, if you look at the participation rates in local government elections, what was it in Auckland this time around?
Barely 30%. Barely
Yes.
30%.
So there's so many people that are disengaged with the process anyway. So why are they getting all excited about some Maori representatives having a vote? And I have colonised on this, actually. I think civics should be taught in schools as one of a priority subject because it touches so many areas of our lives now. For example, more people live in apartments, so they are part of bodies corporate.
Yes.
So they have to learn how to take part in that process, and that's a whole new thing for New Zealand society. And I think young people would benefit greatly from learning about some of the principles around participating in those kinds of structures.
Simon, apparently allowing Māori and youth representation is the end of Westminster democracy as we know it. Once these Māori and youth start having a say, milk will curdle, calf deformities will surge, cats and dogs will start living together, planes will fall from the sky.
It's happening, isn't it?
Is this the threat to democracy act Hobson's Pledge, National and the New Zealand Fascist Front think it is?
Well, can I start by saying I've got a good story for Maria. I was at Auckland Council today all day.
Oh, yeah.
And in the first part of it, a school group was there from the Hare Krishna School in Riverhead. They turned up with teachers and parent supporters, and there would have been 30 plus kids there, and they sat there and listened to about half an hour of council activity. And I've always thought if councils and actually Parliament conduct themselves in a way that if school kids were watching, they'd be excited or pleased or proud or want to take part, that would be a good thing.
Yep.
I feared for these kids. But actually it wasn't too bad. That first half hour it went reasonably well. They had been studying democracy and how it works. And
praise
that
the
is
Lord.
why they were there, which is amazing, which is very exciting. Then it's really good to know that they weren't there for the rest of the meeting because it descended and deteriorated enormously. The Independent Māori Statutory Board, now called Haukura, on the Auckland Council, puts 2 members onto their committees of the whole, which are the big planning and transport committees and the budget committee. They have voting rights on... Yes, he is. They have voting rights on those committees, but they don't have voting rights on the government body.
Yeah.
And the governing body has the ability to overrule any of those committees of the whole at any time. So they contribute. The reason Auckland Council has that, it goes against...
Super City and Rodney Hyde, right?
They didn't want Maori representatives.
It wasn't that. It wasn't quite that. Peter Sharples led a march up Queen Street to promise that in the newly formed coalition government he was forming with Key, he promised there would be Māori seats on that council. It did not happen. And the reason it didn't happen is that there were other iwi representatives who got in John Key's ear, and they have told me this themselves. Their argument was, if we're sitting on council with voting rights, we're simply part of your machine. If we are an independent Māori statutory board recognised in law, we can be, to a reasonable degree, a voice for Māori that contributes to in some kind of partnership way. And Key bought that argument, and that's why they exist. But now they are under attack from a national government. Their position is to go, even though they do not have voting rights on the governing body.
Follow-up question. Is there an irony about the right claiming to defending democracy when they are ramming this law through without a select committee process?
How long have we got to talk about ironies in the way the government operates? I mean, irony. David Seymour's been rich this week talking about how Auckland should not be intensifying its suburbs that he represents. David Seymour, the libertarian who should be saying property owners should be able to do what they want.
Free market decide.
Isn't that what the libertarian position is?
That's right. I mean, Matthew, this government have rammed through 57% of their legislation under urgency, removing select committee scrutiny and proper democratic participation. Where does the right get off lecturing the left on democracy with that record?
I don't know.
57% of legislation.
It's like the Official Information Act. It just gets worse under every government, the abuse of the urgency provisions.
But how can they defend
very
democracy
unusual.
if they're trashing it? Trashing it.
In the context of local body, it's getting to the point that they may as well just abolish it. You know, there was a thing that Christopher Luxon, there was a Christopher Luxon.
I knew that would be bingo.
No, I mean Christopher Luxon, before he was a politician, he was involved with the New Zealand Initiative.
Yes.
And Oliver Hartwich there did some excellent work, took a business group over to Switzerland and talked about ultra-localism, and it seemed to make a lot of sense to me. You know, and each community would decide roughly how...
Their cantons have enormous power, don't they? Yeah.
So that made sense, and Luxon said he believed in it. But the whole trend is the opposite. So this is another example, and there's now amalgamations. It seems to me the next step in this, which is the rates cap. Now, I'm not sure that'll actually be effective. Does it apply only to residential rates? Does it apply only to general rates? Will councils be able to have levies on top of the rate? I mean, when the government says it's going to cap rates, I'm not quite sure the government itself knows what that means.
No, but it sounds good.
But once you've gone to a position where the government is micromanaging these councils to that extent, you wonder what the point of it is. It should be possible for, I don't know, the people of Timaru to elect...
I thought they were pro-local.
Well, the people of Timaru, if they wish, should be able to elect, you know, some libertarian zero rates people, and the people of Oamaru should be able to elect Victor's lot and try communism or whatever, you know, and then you see which works.
Sure.
I mean, it was always the historical strength of Europe, that there were competing states, and we're getting rid of that. The other thing, I'm not sure, if, let's say, the rates cap is actually a serious policy and applies to all rates and to levies, so it really would cap rates at 4% a year, increases, then these councils their interest rates are going to go up.
Yes, through the roof.
They'll have lost
That's
their
right.
taxation, and they have to invest in this infrastructure. One of the great good policies that the previous Labour government, Jacinda Ardern's government, put together but failed to implement, she could say a lot, was that Three Waters, and it got distracted by the so-called Maori issue.
Maoris are taking the water.
Or that issue was about nothing more,
I know,
nor less,
I know,
because it is important, than to try to reduce
the costs,
the borrowing rate, the interest rates.
That's right.
And Labour, I think, made a mistake by trying to make the water issue link it to the pipes issue. So it all was a disaster.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight, and that is the Labour Party list versus New Zealand First Party list. Whose circus has the most clowns? Simon, what leapt out of you about the Labour Party list?
I noticed a couple of things about the Labour Party list. One of them is that they, as many people have been saying, they are very serious about winning those Māori seats, and very serious about saying to Māori, we are your party.
Yes.
So the high places on the list of Māori candidates
caucus still has control of that.
Have power and influence, and there are a lot of significant people in there. They have beefed up that caucus. Which is significant. They're also going after the Green vote.
Yes.
Sophie Hanford, who was School Strike for Climate,
that's right.
will be an MP.
Yep.
Max
Flatt.
Harris will be an MP.
Yes.
Chris Flatt, yes.
Yep.
And Craig Rennie too, down at 51.
Ooh,
not
sure
not
about
what's
winnable.
going on
No,
there.
what I'm saying
That
is
seems mean.
not winnable as on the list.
Yep.
For him to be in Parliament,
He's gotta
he
win the
has to
seat.
beat
Beat
Julianne
He won't
Genter.
either, will he?
He's got to beat Genta.
Not close enough to it to know, but it's going to be a tough one. But what Labour are saying there is we're going very seriously after the other parties on the left.
Yes.
We're going to try and get their votes.
Yes.
There is a degree to which, with Barbara Edmund leading and Hipkins himself leading the way, they are also going after the centrist vote, but they are, I would say, not interested in the New Zealand First vote.
No.
There's no sign in that list that's what they're trying
Matthew, Trashy Stuart Nashi, the heavily concussed Tane Randall, former Conservative Party leader and love poet Colin Craig, and Hobson's pledge recreational cross-burner Elliot Aikili. It's less a party at this stage and more a cavalcade of political circus
to.
freaks,
Alfred
isn't it?
too.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know about Colin Craig.
Nor did I.
Yeah, he's
Isn't that
in.
previous?
He's in. Colin's in.
Interesting.
Poetry,
Well, I mean, this is
very good poetry.
one of the things that New Zealand First has done is gather
Good on them.
people like this. And
They all have niches.
They should put them all on TV and let us see them.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't think that would be a good strategy. I think that Tane Randall, for example, his role is to go to all the rugby clubs in the country, and then Elliot, whatever his face is, will go around all the Hobson Pledge branches, and that's what it's all for.
Randall.
But
Maria, yeah.
The Labour Party list is very interesting. It is a win for the leadership.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm surprised by that the leadership has been able to sideline the
just
left.
kneecapping anyone who might have been a challenge. It's very clever. It's very clever.
It's a bit sad for the contest of ideas.
Maria, if Greg O'Connor were a movie, he'd be No Country for Old White Men.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does Labour's list look like a government in waiting?
I think that they've done pretty well, as Matthew says, in terms of, like Kieran McNulty's position. That did surprise me a wee bit.
Yes.
Maybe he was too much of a challenge for them. They've kind of pushed him down a wee bit.
Yep.
They do have a really good range. One of the people that I was quite interested in was Warwick Klein, the KPMG Asia board member, because they do, lack that business experience.
Yes.
So that was quite nice. But again, as the point has been made by numerous commentators, where's the policy?
Yeah.
They might have the people, but where's the policy? And why are they not telling us anything? Are they, you can leave the National Coalition to hoist itself with its own petard for only so long. Surely at some point you've got to offer an alternative.
Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Simon, your final word this week is?
Just to pick up from what Maria said again, where's the policy? If as I said just now, if the Labour Party has decided it's going to go after Green votes and going to go after Te Pāti Māori votes, it can't do it just with people. It's got to do it with policy,
right.
And it's got to do it quickly.
Yes.
That strategy they've had of forming a low target, I would say, hasn't worked for them. It hasn't been catastrophic because they haven't died in the polls.
No, 36%.
But they ought to be 10 points ahead of where they are now, given the mess the government has made of things, and they're not. And that is on them.
Yeah. Maria, your final word?
It's actually going back to some of the points we've just been making about rates capping. And one of the things the government is trying to do, which I wrote about this week, is reform the development contributions system that councils charge developers contributions in order to pay for the pipes and the roads. Well, what they've come out with is so far unworkable. They're trying. There does need to be reform, because otherwise what happens is rates just keep going up as existing ratepayers have to pick up the tab for future growth in our cities. And so the development levies is the government's proposal. But, talking about ramming through legislation, they wanted to sort out this incredibly complex reform of the system by around about now and have that through, in time for November.
Right.
And the draft that they put out late last year, the feedback from the sector has been, go back to the drawing board, guys.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's just, they haven't thought it through. And even Chris Bishop told the Property Council in a speech a couple of months back that, it did need a bit more work. So they're not, that's not going to happen by November. But the direction of travel is probably correct. It does need reforming, because otherwise it's like squeezing water in a balloon, isn't it? If you cap the rates, it's going to pop out somewhere else.
Matthew Hooton, your final word?
Well, I just returned to the Labour Party. I think they are going to have some problems. Obviously, the National Party has had terrible problems for 2 years with lack of confidence in its leader and failure to develop and implement policy.
So a new National Party leader?
No, that's the less I say, the better. But look, but
almost got him.
I think that Labour is going to run into some troubles. There are divisions between its membership and its leadership, which is never good. Craig Rennie and his faction are not happy. They don't have any policy.
We feel wounded.
Some people think, and I thought that's because policy usually loses your votes, to be blunt, when you're in opposition.
Sure.
But I thought maybe there was like this hidden agenda to launch a social democratic revolution
or whatever.
Doing what I can. Yes, I know, almost got it sorted. I am starting to think that the other view, which Daniel McLaughlin at the Listener communicates,
GST or fresh fruit and vegetables,
that in the end these aren't serious. Hipkins really just as pleased that maybe he's going to get back 3 years earlier or 6 years earlier than they hoped. And I don't think that's going to work for them now that National has kind of got some momentum over the last month.
Ever since you started writing speeches.
I think what's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is that, like in 2002, National bled to the United Future Party. I think Labour's going to bleed to top. And what's interesting about that is that we heard tonight from the leader of TOP, Qiulae Wong, that they will negotiate with the biggest party first. And I know the polls don't, but I think the way the dynamic between National Labour is going, I think National will be the biggest.
Oh, get off
on the night.
Well, if TOP gets all its votes from Labour, then
it's only a 5. The gap between National Labour is only 5% at the moment, and the national leadership is starting to inspire National Party people, and I don't a little bit. It's marginal. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Marginally.
You're talking Nicola Willis. You're talking Nicola Willis.
Get me marginally, but
marginally.
Better than they have for 2 years. Whereas I just suspect that Labour's going to let its supporters down.
Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, can we all just remind everyone, as the Super El Nino bears down upon us, that a senior policy analyst took secret advice from big polluters involved in a legal case to kill it and replace it with policy that was almost word for word the same as their secret lobbying. We also know the senior policy analyst involved was a former New Zealand Initiative researcher. The New Zealand Initiative is the right-wing think tank that works with Atlas Network, and 3 of the 7 big polluters are connected to the New Zealand Initiative. So, you have a secret pollution agenda and right-wing think tanks colluding to hide their influence, and yet the right are silent on all of this. Could you imagine if it was the left who was doing this? Could you imagine what the Taxpayers Union would be screaming? Jordan Williams would be posting Molotov cocktail recipes and the home addresses of Labour Party ministers. But it's the National Party and mates of the New Zealand Initiative. Not a whisper. It's funny what the Taxpayers Union believes is worthy attacking when it's not Māori and it's their mates. The Super El Nino is predicted to peak over over New Zealand this summer. You can think about how the biggest contributors to that global warming are writing the rules as we melt. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small weta in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.